Hi, I'm Ryan, and this is the second video in a series about the 7 habits of highly effective game designers, based on the popular self-help book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. If you missed the first video in this series, I recommend you start there. I will link it in the description as well as in the YouTube card. Today we are talking about habit number 2 of highly effective game designers. And so in the book, the second habit of highly effective people is begin with the end in mind. Begin with the end in mind. So what does that mean for a game designer? And now I think I'm going to approach this from kind of two different levels. I mean, at just kind of a more general level, begin with the end of the mind. The end in mind is saying, before we can think about being productive, as a game designer in our process and what we're doing, we need to know where we're going. We need to know what we're shooting for. I think for a game designer, we can see that in two different ways, kind of at a macro level and kind of at a micro level. So what I mean by that is at a macro level is, where do you want to end up as a game designer? Like, just big, high level. As a game designer, what are your goals? Where do you want to end up? What are you trying to accomplish with being a game designer? Are there specific goals for the types of projects that you would like to get to work on and get to do? Do you have goals of being able to collaborate with certain people, or maybe work for a certain kind of company doing game design? Or maybe your goals are, very simply, you just want to enjoy being a hobbyist exploring game design, and it's just kind of a fun hobby without these, any business-like goals of where you want to go with things. But whatever the answer to that question is going to affect how you move towards that goal. And so before we start talking about, other ways that you can be more effective as a game designer, it's important to start with the end in mind, to think about these things of where are you wanting to get to. So that's macro level, right? Where do I want to go as a game designer? That's in 10 years, where do you see yourself as a game designer? The micro level, I like thinking of it in terms of like at a project level. So for any given project, do the same kind of process of beginning with the end in mind. So, I'm working on a certain project. Before I go anywhere with that, I should be thinking, where do I see this game going? What's kind of the goal of it? One way I like to do that is with all my projects, I make a bulleted list of what are my player experience goals for this game. I think that's something that we can sometimes forget, is that we're game designers, we're striving to create games, but that's really just a step in the process. We're ultimately trying to create experiences, right? That's the actual thing that is we're trying to create, is those players, whether it's players around a table or a player playing a game on their own, they're going to have a certain type of experience. And our goal as a game designer is to construct a set of rules or a set of systems that, when engaged by the player, creates a certain type of experience. Now, if you're like me, that is fascinating. I mean, that's why I'm here talking to you about game design, is because I think that ability to create systems from my own mind that can give someone else a certain type of interactive experience is awesome. But I like to start there with a project, is what are the player experience goals? When someone, at the beginning of a project, I probably have some idea, and I'm excited about some of the things I'm thinking about with that idea of what I could see this game being like, and I really want to work on it. And I have to stop and ask myself, if I'm able to create the game that I'm seeing in my head, and if someone is playing that game, what is their experience going to be like? What are the things that I'm looking to evoke from the player? And I write those in my bulleted list. And it's going to be specific things about how the player's feeling, what kind of decisions maybe are they making, what are the peak moments, like oh my gosh, what's going to make them say, this game is amazing. I'm having so much fun right now. jot those down as experience goals. Because what you've now given yourself going into this project before the project has even started is you've given yourself this compass for what's going to get you to what the game should actually be and what you're wanting it to actually be. And when you're down in the weeds of balancing and game mechanisms and iterating and figuring out what's going on, you can always point back to that list and say, is my design pointing towards that? Is it supporting the experience goals that I stated are important for this project, or that I envision being what is in the final project if this game is to thrive how I'm envisioning it in my head right now? Now, that doesn't mean those have to be locked in and if you have to stick to these experience goals and anything else has to be thrown out. I mean, if you've ever gone through this process, you know that like any creative process, you uncover new information and things, and something you thought was going to be the core aspect of the game might make sense to throw out to go with something that really just started as kind of a little side mechanism or something. And so you can adapt. But I think having the kind of conscious understanding of these right now, as of right now, these are my experience goals for this project, it gives you something to point you in the right direction. And, if you won't need to make changes to it, you can think about, okay, does it make sense for me to be changing my experience goals for this? Maybe I see that it's going to work better as this thing, but I'd go back to the same exercise of envisioning in my mind, what that player experience is going to be like before updating that list. And so I think that's a really good exercise for just giving direction for a project. But I think another thing that it can help with, and another kind of mental exercise you can do here, is you can envision yourself pitching the game before the game has ever even been created. So at this point, I have my experience goals of what if I can create the game I see in my head, these are the experiences that I envision it providing for a player. And then I want you to envision yourself pitching the game to a publisher. Envision that conversation and what are the things you would be talking about with those experience goals. And do you think that would make a very compelling argument to a publisher? Would it get them excited about your game? Now remember, at this point, we don't have a game. We just have a vision for getting to this certain type of player experience. But if that player experience makes a compelling argument for a publisher to want to pick it up, or that this is a game worth playing, well, that's a huge sign that that's a game worth you pursuing trying to make, right? This can be very useful. I mean, if you're anything like me, you may have notebooks full of game ideas, right? All of these different ideas that you had in the shower, on the train, during the car ride to work, in the middle of dinner. You have ideas, and it's like, oh my gosh, so many of these different ideas seem like if I put some time into it, I could, figure out something really cool or really interesting, but I don't have time to pursue all of these different ideas. How do I pick which ones to work on? And I found this to be helpful for me when I go through this exercise of defining player experience goals and then mentally pitching based on those. If I can get to the point where it's like, these experience goals feel really strong and I feel like it could be a strong pitch if I had a game that backed these up, then those are the games that rise to the top of game ideas that rise to the top of my list of which to pursue and actually put time into working on. Now, whether I'm able to actually create a game that fulfills those experience goals is a whole nother question, right? I may be shooting for something that I just never figure out quite how to hit that experience goal that I envisioned, but I at least start there. I at least know that that's what I'm aiming for, and that is so invaluable during the development process to just be able to check what you're doing against that player experience goal. And so I want you to keep that in mind, right? The macro and the micro. So you've got, where do I want to be as a game designer? I'm going to start with the end in mind. From where I am now, I'm gonna at least have an idea of kind of where I want to go. And then with each project, do the same thing. Figure out where am I trying to go with this project, but start there so that you have that established before you get into actually working on a lot of the nitty-gritty details of the project. So I'm going to ask the question for you, what are the player experience goals, if you were able to make that list, for a project that you are working on right now? And maybe you're not working on a project right now. Maybe you are in between projects or haven't started yet. But for the, something that you're working on or that you're planning on starting, what would be those player experience goals? Thinking about, if I made the game exactly the game, that perfect game you're envisioning in your head, what would be those goals? If you could post those down in the comments, I'd love to read through those. I think it's very interesting to kind of to see what those look like for different projects. And I think the other thing that's cool is that list should honestly look somewhat close to what a pitch could look like. Ideally, I read that list and go, yeah, if there was a game that did these things, I would love to try it. I would love to play it, and if I'm in the target audience for that game. You could leave that down in the comments, and if you enjoyed this video and are enjoying this series, consider giving this video a like and subscribing to the channel for more game designer-centric content, and I will see you in the next video.